If we don't put our nation's house in order, the reckoning will be sure and the devastation severe. Now, that's the conclusion of the Federal Debt Commission. The commission actually votes on its proposal on Friday. Republican Senator Judd Gregg, a member of that commission, went on the record. Senator, nice to see you, sir.
Greta, thank you for having me on. I very much appreciate it.
Well, the big day is Friday, we understand, but I have a copy of the report, and what I perhaps like the most is the subheadline, which says, "The Moment of Truth."
Which it is. I mean, we're basically there. We as a nation are on the brink of passing on to our children a country which is fundamentally less prosperous, where their opportunities will be significantly less, because we will have a debt that's unaffordable. We will have deficits which are unaffordable, and the value of our currency will drop. And people will maybe stop buying our bonds. And we're not that far away from Greece and from Ireland. In fact, statistically, we're closing in on them very quickly. The fact that we're so much bigger of a country gives us more running room, but not that much more running room. So action has to occur, and it's going to have to be done in a bold way. It can't just be marginal, it can't be incremental. There has to be bold action. This plan calls for bold action. I don't agree with all of it. I'm going to support it, but because I think on balance it's a good proposal.
All right, 18 are on the commission, 14 have to agree for it to move to the next step to go to Congress. Have you done a head count? Do you have any idea how everyone else is going to vote?
No, I haven't, and I'd be surprised if we got to 14. But
you'd be surprised it's going to pass?
I would be surprised if we got to 14, but this is not an issue of passing. This proposal, which you held up and which is called the Moment of Truth, is basically what Henry Kissinger used to say, the memo controls the meeting. This is the memo for getting done what has to be done, which is to bring under control our out-year spending, deficits, and debt. And it doesn't need 14 votes for the Congress to take action.
But Congress isn't, but I mean, look, let's face it, Congress sort of doesn't exactly move very quickly or very swiftly. We're 30 days out from a deadline they've known about for 10 years. So I mean, it's like, I don't quite have that level of optimism today as you do that Congress will pick it up and run with it if it's a vote no.
We don't have a choice any longer. Literally, we do not have a choice. I mean, it was said well today by Dave Cote, who's a presidential appointee, he runs a company called Honeywell. He said, when the herd moves against you and the market is overtaken by fear, it's an explosive event. And that event's going to occur. There's no question it's going to occur. We don't know when, but it's going to occur because we have run up so much debt that the world at some point is going to say, I'm sorry, we don't trust your currency and we don't trust your debt.
But I don't get why you think Congress will act, whether it's passed or not. I mean, where's the history that will? Because this has been growing and growing and growing and growing. And you've been talking about this for quite some time. I've been up here many times interviewing you about it, and we haven't seen a whole lot of movement out of Congress. So what's the big change?
The American people are ahead of the Congress. This last election was the most definitive message I've ever seen sent by the American electorate. And it was very simple. Stop the spending, stop the deficits, control the debt.
But if they get it, I mean, a perfect example is yesterday that the leaders from both parties went to the White House, and you would think that they would have come out with some decision because they had the leaders on this taxes. Instead, they come out and they say, well, we've agreed to have a meeting later, and we're going to have others make the decisions for us, essentially, and everybody's very nice. Yeah. That's what we got. That's post-election. We got zero out of the White House meeting yesterday.
Constitutional government is a messy business. We're not a parliament. Therefore, you cannot move quickly one way or the other. We were structured to have competing interests and reach consensus. What this proposal is competing interests coming together around consensus. And this memo will, I believe, drive the process. And I happen to believe, I'm reasonably optimistic about this, I guess, that the American people are ahead of the Congress and that the Congress will have to catch up if it expects to get through the next election. And for most members of Congress, getting through the next election is pretty important.
But they got a 2-year ride now. It's 2 years before they have to do essentially anything. They can keep putting it off, putting off votes, delaying things, having meetings to schedule meetings. I mean, there's no sort of there's nothing catastrophic, and I don't see the indication that they want to fix things now other than lots of chatter and talk and criticism.
Well, I hope you're wrong.
I hope I'm wrong too.
And I genuinely believe there is something catastrophic. I can't tell you it's going to happen in the next 2 years, but I can tell you that in the next 5 years it'll happen. And if you know that there's a Force 5 hurricane off your shoreline, and you know it's going to hit the shoreline in 5 years, are you going to do nothing about preparing for it? That's essentially what we're confronting.
All right, you know that. Do your colleagues on both sides of the aisle have that level of certainty that you do that this hurricane's coming?
Everybody on this commission does. And this was an extremely good cross-section. This had Tom Coburn, one of the real leaders of the conservative movement, and Richard Durbin, one of the real leaders of the liberal movement. And everybody around this table understood after the presentations, which went on for months, substantive presentations about how serious our situation is. And then there was this proposal that came forward, which doesn't have total consensus because they're warts. Everybody sees warts. But it does at least move the ball, I think, dramatically down the playing field. I'd love to say we're going to get action within the next 2 years. If we don't get action within the next 2 years, then the market's going to force action on us, and it's not going to be pretty.
All right. So if you don't get your 14 votes on Friday, where does that leave us?
I believe it leaves us with a document that the President can pick up, that Speaker Boehner can pick up, that Harry Reid and Dick Durbin can pick up here in the Senate, and Mitch McConnell, and say, okay, they've done the heavy lifting for us. We have a responsibility to act on this. And I think you're going to see the House Budget Committee, led by Paul Ryan, come forward with a very aggressive budget, which will use a lot of this document as its base. In fact, he said he was going to.
All right. Are the ones you listed, who is actually going to pick it up and do that?
Well, I believe the President is very interested. I haven't talked to him personally, but I listened to the tones coming out. And I believe he understands that his presidency depends on economic recovery. And economic recovery will not occur as long as the markets think we're going to go into fiscal bankruptcy. So unless you fix this out-year problem, you can't get a strong long-term economy. So I believe there's great incentive for the administration to step forward. Clearly, Speaker Boehner is coming in with a very clear mandate: get spending under control. This proposal does it on the discretionary side of the ledger. And I believe everybody around the table understands our tax laws are dysfunctional, they're counterproductive, they don't produce the revenue they should produce, their tax rates are far too high.
And there's special, as the co-chairman told me, that all the sort of deductions and everything in the tax code are essentially earmarks as a result of what special interests got in for their advantage. So while everyone's worried about the earmarks, we got them over at the IRS.
And so what they proposed is take out all the earmarks, take out the deductions and exemptions, and radically reduce the rates. So the top rate is 21%. And the corporate rates come down dramatically, and then people start to invest not for the purposes of avoiding taxes, which is very inefficient, by the way, but for the purposes of getting a good return, creating a job, and that creates economic activity. So I think fundamental tax reform is very much coming at us, and this bill just pushes it along, this proposal.
I so hope you're right, and I so hope I'm wrong in terms of my expectations.
Well, our children deserve to have action here. It is time to govern. And we have to do it, or else we basically lose the greatness which is America.